I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, I am so excited to be speaking to you today. Lucas, me too. Very excited for today's topic. Um, this is what my passion is. And so I am just thrilled to be here with you all. If somebody could just pop in the chat and let me know if you all can hear me and that you're seeing my screen, just to confirm the technology is going as it should be. But I'm going to jump in. So today I'm talking about designing organizational cultures that drive performance. And we'll talk about what that means, but the word design is really central to the way that I think about this work. A little bit about me. I have a PhD from Emory University in interdisciplinary studies, where I studied health equity, bioethics, medical anthropology, disability studies, and access. And so I didn't actually come to this work in sort of the traditional way. Um, Thank you, Lucas, for confirming. There's that delay, huh? um, but I was studying all of these topics that related to equity and inclusion and identity for my PhD and then my professorship as well. And I was being called to come to come or go to different groups on campus and do what I now understand to be DEI related workshops. And so I left to be a DEI consultant. And that's when I started this company, Disruptive Inclusion. And when I was doing that work, which I loved, but I also kind of saw the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of some of the strategies that were being used. Um, and at the same time, I had some insights and knowledge and models from my background in disability that I think could be really useful. And I'm going to go more into that in a minute. But um, so I was doing DEI consulting, I paused for a year and a half where I was on I joined CARE USA on their health equity and rights team, and then the funding for my role ended, and so I went back to consulting. But this time, I redesigned my approach to be better than what I saw as happening in the field of DEI, addressing some of the issues that I think the field was having. And so that's what brings me here today. I specialize in working in health and teams in health and science because obviously I have a background in health and science and I love health and science. But I've worked in all kinds of industries. And so this methodology and this perspective isn't specialized for a particular industry. I'd love to know about you. So if you can put in the chat um, where you're coming from, what industry you're in, what role you're in, any or all of it. And then, just for fun, what your favorite animal is. Mine is the octopus because I am 99% sure that they are secretly plotting underwater to be a better major species on Earth. And they're just really bizarre and smart. So yeah, would love to learn about where you all are coming from. And next slide. So I start every talk with what I call a access statement. An access statement is a recognition and a call out of what is and isn't accessible in a talk, a meeting, a policy, whatever the case may be. And this isn't, although it's inspired by my work in disability, this isn't just for people with disabilities. This is for everyone, including and beyond disability. And so it can, like I said, be used in meetings, policy documents, everything. And so it's really helpful for anybody. And it also communicates to people that access is important and that it's aspirational because you point out what is and isn't accessible. So for today, what is accessible is that this is virtual, so people can join from wherever. Where I'm seeing in the um, San Diego and Northern California, all over the place, which is fantastic. Um, I've designed the slides to be accessible in terms of high contrast and accessible fonts. I aim to speak slowly and clearly without jargon, or if I use jargon, I'll make sure I define it. That being said, please don't hesitate to reach out if I am going too quickly, or if you need me to restate something in a different way for your understanding. I believe that there is the ability to turn on closed captioning for today, which is another access statement. And the recording will be available afterwards. What's not accessible is that I don't have translators, so ASL or language related translators. I wasn't able to send you all this deck or any information necessarily ahead of time. And let's see here, what else? I want to make sure I got everything. Oh, the ability to connect in person. I can't really see your faces. And so I can't get that instant feedback on whether or not you all are following me. And also just can't engage in person in that way, which is sometimes really beneficial. That being said, if there's any way I can make this experience more accessible to you, please put it in the chat and I'll do everything I can to meet those needs. So, what we're going to cover today. Today, I'm going to encourage you to think about team culture not as an afterthought, but rather as an integral part of strategy. Having a culture where people feel supported and energized and engaged only leads to good things, right? Only positive outcomes for that approach. What I'm not going to do is give you a lecture about why inclusion and diversity is important, why it matters. Or I'm not going to give you generic best practices that might not work in your environment for your team. Instead, I want to talk about how we can identify the sources of poor team dynamics. What are the areas of great team dynamics? And I'm going to introduce you to a completely different framework, which is hopefully going to change your perspective on this topic. It's based on architectural design principles. And it's, again, I think that it's just the smartest way to think about this kind of work. I'm also going to give you early access to something I've recently created. So stay tuned for that. But this is a good strategy for teams that are experiencing conflict or lack of cohesion, but also teams that are scaling. So we're going to talk quickly about what are traditional approaches to inclusive and supportive culture design. And then I'm going to go over this new way of approaching organizational cultures, which I call organizational culture design, which has 6 principles. And again, those are the principles that identify ways in which you can design a high functioning, supportive, collaborative team. And then we'll go over an example. We'll crowdsource an example. So be prepared to get your thinking hat on. Isn't that what they say? And I'm going to leave plenty of time to answer your questions. And this could even be crowdsourcing an issue that you're encountering in your organization today. So what we've been doing in DEI, but also in other kinds of organizational culture work, has largely been reactive. With DEI, we saw that influx of programming after the murder of George Floyd. We know that the field was founded in response to the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. People are reacting to internal complaints. And that is very limiting when you're reactive. It's reactive, you're on fire, and you're trying to get your solutions in place, and it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. We also see that it's external programming, a lot of like, let's do a workshop on unconscious bias, and then that'll be it, right? And those have definitely some short-term impacts, but on the long term, it's not as effective for sustainable change and support for your teams. We've also seen very siloed work where we've had this team or that team do things, or we have anti-racism work and anti-sexism work and anti-ableism work, but pulling it all together is really difficult. And the way that I approach this type of work kind of addresses that. And also a lot of shame and blame, pointing our fingers at the people who are in power often, and it fostering a sense of guilt for a perspective that maybe they didn't even know that they had with that unconscious bias work, right? And the people in power who often feel this blame are our decision makers. They're the ones who really can make a lot of change. We've done a really bad job of demonstrating how supportive organizational cultures work for everybody from the very top to the very bottom. And so what these have been is band-aid solutions that, again, might have some short-term temporary benefits, but in the long term are just going to go back to the culture and that you had before, and it's not going to be a sustainable approach. The alternative is what I call organizational culture design. And this is a proactive and embedded sustainable strategy for intentionally designing a supportive culture at your workplace. Now, like I said, my background is in disability. And within disability, there is this concept called universal design. Universal design is an architectural framework that encourages us to build places and spaces and even design products that are as accessible to as many people as possible without introducing new barriers for anyone. So the best example of this is the curb cut. Curb cuts, as you see here on the screen in this picture, are those slopes that go from the curb to the street to make it easier to navigate. These were originally designed for people who use wheelchairs, but once they were implemented, we see they're helpful for people with rolling bags, with strollers or hand carts, people who are distracted on their phones, toddlers. Everybody can use a curb cut, but it doesn't make it more difficult for anyone to navigate between the street and the curb. When I started doing DEI, I was bringing up this model to the people I was collaborating with, and nobody had heard of it. And I was shocked because to me, it seems like the most reasonable model to integrate into that work. And so again, like I said, I kind of paused my consulting while I was at CARE for a year and a half. And when I came back to it, I said, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to create this model that is proactive. So like universal design and building buildings and products, you're predicting what potential barriers people might encounter, designing to avoid those, and doing it in a way that also considers all the other people who might encounter it, right? So, and then embedding it into your cultural policies, practices, behaviors, everything. So there are a few different times when it's good to use organizational culture design. Teams that are experiencing high turnover, disengagement, even conflict, that's when you need to investigate what's going on with this team. How do we make changes? We know that these instances of turnover, disengagement, and conflict, they stall progress. They cost a lot of money, and they just kind of compound itself by leading to more disengagement, more conflict, right? So that's one time when an organizational culture approach might be useful. Other times are when scaling or building an organization. I hear all the time, and I'm sure you all have experienced this, when a company is growing, it starts to lose some of its best people, some of the people that have been there the longest, because the culture changes. And so when you're scaling, if you want to make sure that the people who started with you are going to continue to stay with you and keep being engaged and excited, then you need to intentionally think about how to preserve the aspects of culture that are keeping them there. This, again, is part of your strategic visioning in terms of your growth. It's also great for brand new organizations that are building and want to go ahead and integrate some policies and practices that ensure inclusion and support and high engagement from the very get-go. Those, of course, are the clients who don't have any money to afford a consultant, but hopefully, if I spread the word about this approach, they can do some of that themselves. So the way that I do this work is I always start by doing internal research. I am a social scientist at heart. That is my nerd brain. I am always looking for data and how to leverage it. And so I want to talk to teams. I want to do surveys, and I want to use that data and information to prioritize where the concerns are and to identify the strengths. So when we talk to people on the ground experiencing issues, then they can tell me or you about what the source is. And it's always unique in every team. There's always a unique component to it that doesn't necessarily translate to every other culture, right? Every other team. When I have those prioritized concerns and those strengths, the strengths is something that often we miss because those are a foundation on which to build, that we can shore up, that we can make sure continue in your strategic culture. I like to crowdsource solutions, and what I mean by that is, working with a representative example or representative group of team members, different hierarchical levels, different roles, different tenures, things like that, to ask them, what do we do about this? How can we work forward? And of course, coming there with some ideas of already doing this work, but getting them to give insight as well, because they're the ones on the ground. They're the ones going to know what happens and what's going to work and what isn't going to work. And also it kind of creates a good sense of buy-in for the change that's about to happen. And then embedding the changes into, like I've said before, practices, policies, procedures, behaviors, and then monitoring it for as long as possible, because things change, right? Our staff changes, the culture around us change. I mean, the influx of AI is something that's happening right now, that even if you had a really strong culture design, you'd probably need to go back and monitor and see if there needs to be any updates to it, right? So embedding and monitoring it continually. Again, if you don't have well-designed culture, intentionally designed culture, then you're at such a high risk for experiencing dysfunction and stalemates and turnover and all of that stuff, right? When you intentionally design your organizational culture to reflect the values of the organization, to be supportive, to be inclusive, then you're going to reduce burnout. This is really important for the teams in health and science that I work with, but it's really for anybody. We see high levels of burnout when people don't feel engaged, don't feel appreciated, right? Innovation is going to increase if you are able to design a culture for innovation, for collaboration. And it's going to be sustainable because you're going to embed it into the way your organization defines itself and how it defines its work. And that's going to preserve the culture you want to see in the workplace going forward. So, like I mentioned, organizational culture design has 6 core principles: trust and transparency, expect and respect expertise, collaboration and constructive conflict, embedded flexibility, questioning the status quo, and celebration. And I'm going to go over each of them in just real briefly, separately. And but I want to point out that I've written about all of these in my newsletter, Science of High Performance, with the evidence that supports it. Again, big data nerd, former academic, got to have those citations and references. So if you're interested, I can point you to particular issues that feature details about any of these. So just let me know, or we can have a meeting and talk about it. So we'll start with trust and transparency. Trust flows both ways. A leader needs to trust their team, and teams need to trust their leaders. Transparency builds trust. So when you know what's happening and you understand, oh, sorry about that. Um, Understand that what's happening at your organization, then trust is going to grow between the team and the leadership. I always encourage people to ask themselves who could benefit if we are more transparent about organizational processes, and who benefits from less transparency. The answer to that former question is often leadership. And so when you ask that question, why aren't we sharing with our team members the decision making process for hiring new people? Then that's going to be an area that probably identifies potential waviness in some organizational ethics. The next one is expect and respect expertise. We all have expertise that we've brought to the table that aren't necessarily reflected in our academic or professional experiences. We've all had the experience of a child making an observation that kind of blows our mind, right? So we can use that example to think about how people, at all levels in all sectors of our organizations can come up with some great ideas, can help us identify some problems that maybe we didn't have before, can maybe come up with some creative solutions. So everybody has expertise to bring to the table. And if we provide the space for this contribution, it'll increase innovation and it can increase engagement. Everybody can feel safe. So the reflection question I have for you here is, does everyone on your team feel safe sharing their feedback and ideas? If not, then how can we work towards increasing that type of psychological safety? All right. The next one is collaboration and constructive conflict. This is really, really important for teams in health and science, but really helpful for all teams because, again, if we respect and expect expertise, we're going to be open to listening to different perspectives and having healthy debates about how to do things. Collaboration leads to high performance. We know this. And healthy debate and conflict leads to innovation and progress. So we want to make sure we foster an environment where people feel safe enough to speak up and disagree in a way that leads to good, healthy conversations about that disagreement and lead to creative solutioning. Here, I ask you for your reflective questions. Can your teams engage in healthy and productive debates that then they can move on from, right? There's no hard feelings in the disagreements. So the next one is questioning the status quo. This one's my favorite. I say it all the time, that we kind of get stuck in these habits, in these ways of doing things that we don't second guess. We just kind of do it because we've always done it, right? We follow habit and precedent, even if it's not working for us anymore, even if it's stalling our progress. And we might not even notice that it's stalling our progress until we ask the question, why are we doing this? So for here, I ask you to reflect on, what is your team doing? Because that's just the way it's always been done. The example that is most recent and everybody can relate to is post-COVID return to work policies. When we worked from home, that shift happened, a lot of teams realized that they can be just as, if not more, productive and innovative working from home than in the office. But then when the restrictions were lifted, a lot of people started to insist on their teams coming back into the office and being in person because that's the way it's always been done. So, and there's probably a lot of other reasons, but when we had to step outside that box of normal going into the office 5 days a week, we realized that there was an area we could increase some flexibility, which is my next principle, embedded flexibility. You want to embed flexibility with boundaries into organizational policies, procedures, practices, anything you can in order to create organizational environments where people can work in the way that's best for them. We are all our own experts in ourselves. And so if I find that I am super productive at 2 a.m. rather than 2 p.m. and I'm still available during normal work hours for meetings and things, then why does it matter if I'm doing the work at 2 a.m. other than 2 p.m.? The other benefit of embedded flexibility is that it doesn't eliminate, but it reduces the need for individual specific modifications and accommodations. If you have a flex work policy in terms of what hours you're working, that's really good for people with disabilities who might have different time schedules or lots of doctor's appointments. It's really good for caregivers of young children or elderly people who might have to, step away and care for them during the day. It really helps a whole lot of people at once. So embedding flexibility where you can is such a benefit. So I encourage you to reflect on the question, how can flexible policies in your organization benefit everyone? Where can we introduce some flexibility? And the last one is celebration. This one often gets left out, but everybody loves to feel recognized. It feels good to be recognized. And so I encourage celebration as much as possible, and not just celebrating finishing a project or doing a presentation to the leadership, anything like that. It also can be celebrating the coworker whose daughter just graduated from college, or celebrating somebody who just completed a professional development certification. It can be work and non-work related. What that conveys to your team is that they're valued, not just as a person that works on these projects, not just as an employee, but as a person. You're invested in their well-being, their whole person well-being, and not just their workplace well-being. So you can reflect on the question of, are there ways to recognize our successes in and out of work? How do we do that? Do we nominate people on our team? I realized that, Chris had a big trip planned and he finally got to go on it. So we want to celebrate that in this way. And it doesn't have to be monetary. It doesn't have to be big. We can think about notes, little gifts, just some time to connect with people in a little 15-minute break, right? So there's lots of ways that this can take place. So if reactive and siloed and surface level approaches aren't working, then we need to shift our perspective. We need to shift from how do we avoid lawsuits and how do we signal that we care to how do we build systems where everyone can contribute and excel. Instead of waiting for problems to arise and addressing them individually and separately, we can build organizations where the barriers to contribution, to belonging, don't exist in the first place or exist at a very, very low level. We can embed inclusion into how work actually gets done instead of a compliance-driven training. We can create and design cultures that work for everybody and that are sustainable. So it's not the way we think about inclusion and support in an organizational setting. It's organizational culture design. And it comes from, a different perspective and a different intention than some of the traditional ways we've been looking at this work. And the result is that everyone gets a better system. It works for everyone because we're thinking about everyone from the start. We're thinking about our current and even potential future team members who might come in and making sure that we have planned for them to feel supported and engaged. So I'm going to go over an example, and then we're going to crowdsource an example, which I'm very excited about. So this is one that I hear all the time. It kind of relates to the example I just gave, but you're working at a team that is in multiple time zones. You have these remote team meetings. Some people dominate meetings. Other people never speak. Maybe it's because some people are joining at night or really early in the morning. That happened to me at CARE. I had these 7 a.m. meetings with the Philippines. Woo, they were rough. Um, but then when there are decisions being made, often they're made with mystery, right? So, what are some principles that are missing or potentially weak with this team? Well, embedded flexibility. So if there's no asynchronous options for participating, then that's going to limit get capturing some team members' contributions. So can we think about that as a principle to shore up? Expect and respect expertise. So in this situation, verbal processors dominate, but people who maybe take a minute uh, to think about what their answer is and to speak quickly or are unable to speak quickly, we might be missing their perspectives. And finally, trust and transparency. If decisions are being made that don't seem to match up with what the ideas were in the team meetings, then people aren't going to really understand why things are happening, and that's going to reduce trust and transparency. So, what might a redesign look like? Well, we might design different ways to contribute to meetings in terms of providing comments before a meeting, which would require sending out detailed agendas ahead of time, of course. Um, we might want to allow a publicly available or internally available platform that people can contribute to after the meeting. A lot of the times, we have great ideas like an hour after a meeting happened. What if we could post those up on a bulletin board and other people could review and comment? Those kinds of creative ways of making sure that everybody can contribute can really do a lot for engagement and creativity and innovation. Rotating facilitation, taking turns in who is leading the meeting. This happens, I've seen this happen really well in teams, and I've seen it not happen really well. I've seen it in where teams don't understand why they're doing it, where they just feel really, really shy. So something like this requires a very direct explanation of why you're doing it. And then if there are people who are really shy, perhaps they can co-lead with somebody else. So they're still kind of up there leading, but maybe with somebody who is a little bit more vocal. And then a clear documentation of how a team makes decisions that is shared with the team so that when you're in a meeting and you're brainstorming and then something else happens that wasn't discussed, you know why. That can really help encourage continued participation, because if you're helping to brainstorm and then you don't see your ideas reflected in the final decision, then why would you want to speak up anytime after that, right? So let's do a crowdsourced example. So here's the pattern. Great people leave. The exit interviews cite things like they didn't like the schedule or the salary. You've implemented some salary increases, but you're still having high turnover. So something else is going on. Leadership doesn't understand. Um, so now we are on LinkedIn, so there's a delay. So I'm going to wait. So while I'm pausing and y'all are catching up, then come up with some ideas of what potential principles are weakened or missing and how to potentially redesign them and pop that into the chat. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to try to catch up on some of these chat comments about where people are and what animal you like. New people may be wondering why people are saying, I'm from Atlanta and my favorite animal is an octopus. That's because I asked for it. What is your favorite animal? Giraffe, yes. Wolf, yes, Lucas. I like that you said I'll go with wolf today because it does change. Oh, Kaleem, thanks for putting in your LinkedIn information. Everybody else, please, I encourage you to do that too and connect with each other. Dogs, yes, Troy, yes. Oh, Wida, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. We should connect because I've done some work with people who have experienced incarceration. Malcolm, love that you're on the board of the National Queer Theater. Oh, Brandon, that sounds like really fascinating work. I definitely want to learn more about that. Yes, Lucas. And often I find that AI creates just hallucinates sources that don't actually relate to what we've been talking about or what you're writing about. You go and look for it in the source that AI provided, and it's just not there. Okay, while I'm waiting for you all, I'm impatient. I can't have silence, so I'm just going to keep talking. But I'm going to talk about this example. Um, you know, the core principles that may be in play here could be trust and transparency. Maybe people don't feel like they know about the health of the organization because they don't get any information about that. And so they feel nervous that things are going to change. And so they go ahead and leave, or they don't trust leadership. They think that pay is inequitable, things like that. Um, Expecting and respecting expertise could also be in play here, that people don't feel like they're being listened to and heard when they try to contribute ideas or solutions. They're getting ignored. People are kind of moving on and not really respecting or listening to them. Embedded flexibility, of course, is one. The exit interviews are actually supporting that. It's saying that it might be the schedules, so that could be a source of it. And then how to sort of redesign. Well, trust and transparency, just being transparent. I mean, I encourage transparency from even in pay and pay bands and pay formulas. Again, if you aren't providing that information, you have to kind of ask why and who it's protecting. And that is really can be very relieving. How can we create an environment where people's expertise are respected and listened to? Maybe it is specifically asking everybody in a meeting what their idea is. So if Joe is often quiet during meetings, at some point you can say, Joe, I really want your thoughts on this. I'm going to circle back to you in about 5 minutes, if that's okay. You can write it down if that's more comfortable for you, things like that. And flexibility, are there ways to integrate flexible work schedules, 4 day a week work weeks, 4 days at 10 hours a day, things like that, to where people can have 3 day weekends or be able to work when it's best for them to work. But of course, let's see here. Lucas said the first question would be, what is being asked during the exit interview and who is asking? Yes, absolutely. That is also an issue of trust and transparency. I'm really glad you brought that up. So we can, work on that by telling people what exit interviews are going to be like and what's going to happen with that information. Awesome. Keep going in the comments. Again, I know the delay means it's not as interactive as I had hoped, but we're doing it. Before, just like with that example, there's a lot we don't know, right? And so before we can figure out what's lacking or what's going wrong, we need to figure out what the source of the issue is. And so we need to do the research, right? Before you design anything, you need to understand what you're working with. And lucky for all of you, I've just created a brand new quick culture diagnostic that I'm looking for beta testers. If you go to this website or use the QR code, I'm beta testing. I think it limits it to 10 people put a limit for 10 people. So if you don't get access um, right now, just email me and you'll be first on the list for when I redesign and launch it based on the feedback. The whole thing, including giving feedback, should take about 15 to 20 minutes. And for beta testers, I'm offering a free follow-up 30 minutes to discuss the results of your assessment, and also a 10% off services as a thank you for spending time and looking at this assessment from your perspective. Regardless, when we figure out what the source of the issue is, we need to start small. Pick one principle to work on, one system to work on, or one change to focus in on. A lot of the times, I encourage teams to work on low-hanging fruit. So, transparency is often a very easy low-hanging fruit. It's got an immediate response. It's very low cost, and it can really do a powerful impact. I just saw a question on what my email address is. I will put it up in the last slide, but it's jen@disruptiveinclusion.com. And then once you decide where you're going to start, crowdsource it. Ask the people who are most impacted how they would make the change, and then embed it and monitor it. Just like I was talking about earlier, that ongoing collection of data is going to be really helpful and important. So with that, I'm excited to discuss with you what challenges you're experiencing, what questions you might have for me about any of the ideas that I've been sharing with you today. Go ahead and put those in the comment, I think, or chat box. I think that's going to be the best way to go about this. And I wanted to also, Dolphin, yes. I also wanted to close with this quote that I came across. It's anonymous. I couldn't figure out who first made it, but the quote was, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." So if we could go back in time and do this kind of work, then that would be amazing, but we can't, so we might as well start it now. So I will wait patiently for the delay to catch up so I can get some of your questions. Oh, and here is how to contact me. So Brandon in the chat says, "I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with that said they thought they had great culture, but people were genuinely afraid to speak up about anything. Bad results, projects going off track, people hoarding information. It can be really bad." Absolutely. And what's interesting, Brandon, is the newsletter issue that's going out tomorrow talks about how organizational hierarchy can lead to this exact thing, to people not feeling safe speaking up, and how you have to be really intentional about, of course, no one's arguing to get rid of um, hierarchy, but intentionally designing it so that your leadership is approachable and safe is huge for that. But yeah, the people who are saying our culture's great here are the people who are not, in it. They are perhaps leadership, they're seeing it from the outside. And so, yes, and definitely that can be a bad situation that could use some help. I'm guessing, Brandon, that might be a situation where you're experiencing a lot of turnover in response to that type of culture. Yeah, I hear you on that one. Yes, I will definitely be sharing the deck. If you could email me, I'm happy to share it with you. That's probably the best way to get it, because I don't think I can post it I'll try to post it on the LinkedIn Live page. I'm not sure if I can, but it is also being recorded, so that's good. Oh, trees, Brandon, fantastic. I just learned of a new podcast called Completely Arbitrary, but it's arbor, like trees, and it's by an arborist, and it's fantastic. So highly recommend that. Any questions, comments, anything like that? Ugh, I hate this delay. Let's see what happens if I uh, also, I would love to hear if anybody has experienced really great culture and what you think was working in that situation. Um, I think that'd be great. Um, Troy says, lots of organization consultants and practitioners on this call. What would be my 10-word answer to someone on an elevator of what culture is? This question can be for all as well. Yes, please, everybody. Troy always has good questions. Yes, if anybody has a response to this, but I would say culture is a sense that reflects the values of an organization. Uh, that's really bad. Um, but I'm going to continue to think about it. Um, Organizational culture is the structure that we put to support our teams, maybe. I don't think that's 10 words. But I love this question, and now I'm gonna probably wake up in the middle of the night with 10 fantastic words and then go back to sleep and wake up again, and it's gonna be completely gone. Oh, oh, I'm hearing myself. Yes, we did the exit interviews. That information needs to be acted on as well. Um, so if you're hearing salary, then that's important. Okay, we have a culture definition. We have a couple. It's a feeling based on cultural norms and how you do things. Okay, yes, but I challenge you, Salu, I hope Mr. Timbo, I hope I pronounced that correctly, to revise without using the word cultural. Brandon says, culture is the way your organization responds to your team's feelings. I like that, Brandon. I like that. It's the way, yes. I really, I want to, I think it's an enactment of values, how you're putting your organizational values into action for your teams. Um, that's that's where my mind keeps going. Troy, I would love your 10-word answer to this as well. Okay. So there are a lot of consultants and practitioners on this call, which I think is really exciting. And I really, really hope that um, everybody kind of walks away with some new perspectives and some ways to rethink how we're doing HR, how we're doing strategy, how we're doing implementation, how we're doing programming, because there's this kind of thinking can really impact all of those areas. And so I'm excited to um, see and hear about ways that you've implemented some of the strategies or some of the ways of thinking that we've talked about here today. Um, Troy is up here with how you put your organizational values into action for your teams. That's what I said, I think. Um, so that's what I have for you today. We're about a few minutes before 3 Eastern. So I'm going to close it out. I will continue to hang out to receive any additional questions or anything that anybody has. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out. Email me, jen@disruptiveinclusion.com. Um, if you missed the beta testing link, there it is again. Feel free to go in there. Can't wait to hear what you all think about that tool. And I am excited to launch it and make it publicly available for everybody. And appreciate anybody who is helping me fine tune this tool, especially since you guys got this in depth overview of this approach. So have a good rest of your Tuesday. And I look forward to working with some of you or hearing how you're doing in the future.